Welcome to Family Matters. I'm Justice Harvey Brownstone, and on this episode, we're going to talk about a disturbing but important issue affecting some of the most vulnerable people in our society, senior citizens. You know, most of us dream of living to a ripe old age, living a life of comfort and security, surrounded by loving family and friends. But sadly, this is not the reality for many seniors who have become victims of elder abuse. What is elder abuse? Who are the perpetrators? What can be done about it? And how can we protect ourselves before it's too late? These are the issues we will be exploring today. Let's meet our first guest, an award-winning journalist, college professor, and public relations executive, and author of Granny Snatching. The title might put a smile on your face, but the book won't. It's a harrowing account of what happened to a 92-year-old widow who battled her own family in court to regain her freedom. Please welcome, from Connecticut, Mr. Ron Winter. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here. Ron, thank you so much for being here and traveling from Connecticut to discuss what must be an extremely painful and emotional issue for you.
Thanks for having me here, and it's worth the trip to get the word out.
For those of people watching who may not yet have read your book, Granny Snatching, this is about your mother, Ella. She's now 93, I understand.
That's correct.
And to make a long story short, she was ill, living in New York. There was a decision made between you and your two siblings that she would move to live with you in Connecticut.
That's correct.
And because the power of attorney was with your sister in New York, and your mother was going to be living in Connecticut, the decision was made that she should revoke that power of attorney and give you the power of attorney so that you could manage her financial affairs in Connecticut.
That's correct.
And move the assets to Connecticut.
Correct.
Where she was going to have a permanent home. And then your sister decided that the agreement wasn't that she would live with you, it was only going to be a visit until your mother could move into a facility.
Apparently, there was a decision made to put my mother into a facility long before I was notified that she was even ill. I didn't know about that, and if I had known about it, it wouldn't have changed anything. When I found out about it, which was 2 hours before they actually committed her to the facility, she was in the hospital and there were 3 people in her room from the facility ready to take her away. I got a phone call telling me about it, and I said, we don't have to do that. We have room, we can manage, we can bring her here.
And that's what happened.
And that's exactly what happened, and the other members of my family brought her to my house along with an awful lot of her belongings. There was never a question that it was going to be a permanent move, and there was never a question about how it would be effected, that everybody was in support of it.
But the real crux of it is really, though, that after your sister decided that this was not temporary, that was not permanent, it was just temporary, she brought court proceedings to revoke that power of attorney, alleging that there had been some form of fraud. Now tell us, your mother, she was in the hospital, and as I understood your book, your mother was suffering from some form of disorientation.
Correct.
And did the family think at that time that this was Alzheimer's?
The family had actually been saying for about 3 years prior to this hospitalization that she had Alzheimer's, and had taken her to doctors making that claim. And we found out later through the doctor's records that the doctors had been saying, no, she doesn't. As we found out later, after she moved in with us, virtually every single malady my mother was suffering from, with the exception of glaucoma, was treatable by nutrition, proper nutrition.
Now that's a really important point. I was fascinated in the book that what was described as extreme disorientation was actually caused by a potassium deficiency.
Correct.
And not dementia.
Correct.
And the other fascinating thing I found, one of the pieces of evidence that was used to try to prove that your mother was not competent was that she couldn't balance a checkbook. And it turned out the problem was that the entries were just too small for her to read.
My mother's mind with mathematics is so sharp, she puts most people 60, 70 years younger than her to shame. She went through school at a time when they learned math by rote. We ended up having to take her for what they call a mini mental exam, what part of which is counting backward from 100 by sevens. My mother was in this office with several doctors, nurses, family members, and doing it in her head faster than anybody else could do it on a calculator. By the time she got down around 50, nobody was sure whether she was right or not, but it turns out she was.
But the real message, I think, just to complete the story for our viewers who may not yet have read the book, there was a court case because the action was brought by your sister to have her committed. It was in New York, even though she was living in Connecticut. And your mother ended up having to go to court and testify in front of the judge after there had been an evaluation by a court-appointed evaluator.
Correct.
And your mother satisfied the judge after some 2 hours.
She actually listened to about 5 hours of testimony against her.
By her own 2 children.
By her 2 children, by one of her granddaughters, by an alleged medical expert who really not only had never examined my mother, had never even met my mother, and wasn't a doctor anyway.
So she sat at 92 years old. She sat through 5 hours of testimony in a courtroom. I understand she wasn't allowed to break for lunch.
Correct.
And then had to testify herself for 2 hours. And the judge ruled that she was completely mentally
absolutely
fit
competent
in every way. Now, what's the real message? You went to the trouble of writing a very detailed, lengthy book that
but it's fast read.
I have to say, though, it may be a fast read, and it was, I agree. I read it in 3 days. I found that you decided to dedicate the first half to getting to know her, exactly, and you and your siblings. And then the second half really was the meat of the elder abuse issues. What made you write the book?
In the first case, my mother asked me to. She was visiting some new friends in Connecticut and telling them about all that was going on in her life, and somebody said to her, "Gee, somebody should write a book about your life. It's so interesting." And she came home and said, "Gee, somebody ought to write a book about my life because my new friends are telling me it's so interesting. Who do you think that could be?" Well, there was only one writer in the family, so by default it became me. But the truth of it, beyond that is the truth of it, but beyond that, the lawsuit that was filed in the Supreme Court in Albany, New York, had what I call 38 pages of sewer sludge about my mother in it. So many allegations that were just totally false, that were easily proven to be false.
What would make a person get some message from this other than, oh, well, he and his sister and other brother were in a dispute, and because it's a private family matter? We
usually hear only about the cases where phenomenal amounts of money are involved. This was a minuscule amount of money, and what I found, and I was a total babe in the woods when this all got started regarding elder abuse. I had no idea. But in the United States alone, back around 2005, 2006, which is the last year I can get statistics for, there were 750,000 reported cases of elder abuse, which granny snatching is a significant percentage, and it's on the rise, and it's happening to normal people all over.
And granny snatching really is the attempt to put elders into facilities when they don't need that kind of care.
Exactly, and when they do that, the allegations in the lawsuit required that my sister be named guardian over my mother, which would have taken away all of her rights, all of her visitation, all of her abilities, any control over anything in her life, and on top of that, they also wanted all of her money.
This must be a very, very painful experience for you to be isolated from your family.
It certainly isn't any fun. It's no fun. We did not expect that, and at the time that I suggested that they bring Mom to our house and let her live out her life with us, I did think that there was going to be some kind of a meeting of the minds amongst my family members. That I told them all, come visit when you want, just give me enough notice so we're not having conflicting schedules. But it never happened. Instead, within 3 weeks, we were at war. And
there it is. There it is. I think you've said it all. I think that's the message. If you want to prevent a war, you've got to take some steps. When we return, we're going to hear from two experts to tell us how we can prevent this kind of situation from happening to us. Stay with us. Let's meet our next guests. First, we have a lawyer with 38 years' experience who has dedicated much of his law practice to protecting the legal rights of senior citizens. Please welcome Mr. Jim Clapp. Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
And joining Jim, please help me welcome a retired geriatric nurse who has been a hospital board trustee, a school board trustee, and a municipal councillor, and is an elder advocate with Seniors Entitlement Services in Victoria, British Columbia, Ms. Carol Pickup. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Carol and Jim, thank you both so much for being here. I know that you heard our first segment, and I wondered what your reactions were.
Heard it many times.
Yes, I wasn't surprised at all because that type of abuse is happening all the time in British Columbia and right in Victoria.
As well as everywhere else, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us, what is elder abuse? What forms can abuse take?
Well, number one thing, it seems to always revolve around money. First, that seems to be the biggest issue. People are trying to get hold of money before the person has expired, of course.
Although in the case of Ella Winter, there's not much money there. This is not a rich person.
Yeah.
Is that unusual?
There's another angle to elder abuse, and that is lack of money for seniors, so that they don't have a choice as to what happens to them in terms of housing, etc. So there's another angle on elder abuse, and that abuse, I think, is perpetrated by senior levels of government.
So in terms of the forms of abuse, you've told us about a motivation for abuse, which can be financial, but the types of abuse, I take it there's physical abuse, there can be emotional abuse, and
lack of access to services and just the rudiments of living. That's abuse as far as I'm concerned.
And wouldn't neglect form abuse as well?
That's exactly right, yes.
Very disturbing, very concerning. People who have lived their entire lives helping others, building a life for themselves, looking for happiness in their senior years, only to face abuse. When we return, I'm going to ask our experts to tell us, how do decisions get made about putting an elderly relative in an assisted facility? And what can we do now to prevent elder abuse for ourselves before it's too late? Please stay with us. Welcome back to Family Matters and our discussion on elder abuse. Can you tell us how widespread is this problem? Do you have any idea? We heard some numbers from Ron Winter. Any idea?
I think it's pretty widespread. The problem is that there aren't mechanisms in place to actually keep track of this and to acknowledge it. It's easier to pretend it doesn't happen, and then you don't have to resource it or take the appropriate steps and be accountable. The lack of accountability in the system around elders is absolutely disgraceful.
Tell me, you know, what we heard in our first segment regarding Ella Winter had to do with the decision of whether and when an elderly person should be moved to an assisted living facility or a nursing home or retirement home. How should that decision get made?
It certainly should get made with the total participation of the person involved.
But Carol, you know, we all know seniors who have said, I'm not going. I can live on my own. I know I can do it, and they can't. It's not uncommon.
That's true enough, but there are many, many options other than putting people into institutions. There's home support, there's all kinds of things that can be done for a senior. I'm working with an 81-year-old right now, and I'm getting her house upgraded by the federal government so that she can live in it for a lot longer, I hope.
So we should be looking at ways to maximize a person's ability
Independence.
to remain independent in their own home. That's the first option.
Absolutely.
But what happens when that can't be done anymore? Let's say a person needs assistance getting dressed, with bathroom, with feeding, and they really need someone all the time, and they may not be able to afford a full-time caregiver. How does the decision get made? Especially if the person's saying, no, 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 I can do it, I'm fine.
Well, again, if there is a family involved, the family should be working together around this thing. And if a member of the family, like Ron, are prepared to take the senior into their home and act as a support, that should be welcomed and applauded by the rest of the family. This idea of seniors having to automatically, because they can't look after themselves totally, go into an institution is nonsense. And it's tantamount to taking away their rights and their quality of life.
But you know, Ron, I'm thinking, not Ron, sorry, Jim. I'm thinking to myself, a person, an adult child of an elderly person could be kind of caught between a rock and a hard place in a way. Yeah. If you allow a senior parent who's insistent on staying home and really not able to take care of themselves to do it, you could be accused of neglect. If they're not getting proper nutrition, they're not taking care of themselves, they may need help walking and they could fall, you could be accused of not having properly taken care of your parent.
This is where a representation agreement should come in, quite frankly.
Tell us about that. What's a representation agreement?
Well, we have basically three elements that are absolutely essential for anyone, whether you're 18 or 80. You need a will. And a wills, of course, are you appoint an executor who will take care of things when you're not around.
But that's when you die.
And many people are confused. They come to the office and they say, well, I don't need a power of attorney. I don't need a health directive. I've got an executor. And I explain to them, it sounds kind of kindergarten, but, excuse me, you're not going to be here for that. We need to do something while you're alive. So on the River of Life, we have powers of attorney, which deal with business matters, financial matters, et cetera, et cetera. And recently, in this province and many other places, there's a thing called a health directive or a representation agreement, which specifically appoints a first, second, even a third or fourth choice in order of preference for you to take care of your health care if you can't make the decision.
So do you need two power of attorneys, one to take care of your body, of your health, in case you are not mentally competent, and one to take care of your money and your property?
Yes, for many years, powers of attorney were kind of cobbled up an idea using powers of attorney to slide over into the health side. But that, of course, is now completely divisive. They're two separate things.
They're totally separate. And when do they come into effect? If a person has a power of attorney that says, I appoint my spouse or one of my children
Good question.
to take care of these issues, when does it start?
That's a great question because there are many forms of powers of attorney. The most popular one is what I call the total power of attorney. You love your wife, you trust your wife, she appoints you, you appoint her, and it's live right now, and it usually is an enduring power of attorney that doesn't require qualifications, so you don't have to go to a judge later to prove you're incompetent. And then secondly...
And that takes effect right away.
And that takes effect right away and stays that way until you withdraw it.
But that's for people that are ready right now to turn over control over their life to someone else. And I would imagine a person would do that because they know now that they need to.
Yes, and I don't think you should wait till you're 80 to do it. I think people should start thinking about these things now because a person who's brain damage, for example, is going to get treated just like a senior citizen who's got Alzheimer's.
So what about if you're not ready to have that done now, but you want this arrangement made in case you get hit by a truck, you're in a coma, you get ill, even if you're not elderly?
It's a bit of a catch-22 because if you have a power of attorney that states, if I become incompetent, so determined, then my power of attorney kicks in. Now you're back in the lawyer's hands, which we love, and make a lot more money trying to prove to a judge and with witnesses and affidavits from two doctors that this person's not competent. Then the power of attorney kicks in.
So this is complicated because if I write a power of attorney that I want my partner to take care of me, to take care of all my issues, if I become incompetent mentally, who gets to decide when I'm incompetent mentally as opposed to being in a bad mood?
Well, you're going to have to get medical support and you're going to have to get a court order.
So it could go to court. And is that what you do in your practice?
It could get, yes, I have. And if you don't have that, you have to go to get what's called a committeeship, where you bring in the public trustee and all that mess, and then you're looking at a $10,000 or $12,000 legal bill. A good power of attorney or that I described between husband and wife can be done for $150, $200.
So what do you have to say to people who where siblings don't agree? In Ron Winter's case, there are 3 siblings. He's got his mother living with him. 2 siblings feel that she is mentally incompetent, should be in a home, and not living with him, and that she's under his control and duress. What's an elderly person supposed to do if, and you know this does exist, that there are families where siblings do not get along and do not even talk to each other? This is a reality. How does a lawyer deal with that?
Well, you have to look at, first of all, can your client, the senior citizen, give you instructions? That's the first thing I do. And unfortunately, and this is maybe a bit of a hack of the legal profession, there are about 70 areas of practice, and many lawyers slide into areas of practice where their competency would be considered suspect. So if you're going to a lawyer and say, I need help with regard to my power of attorney, my representation agreement, my will, you better make sure that person does lots of it, because it isn't simple. You don't go buy a will kit for $75. I joke that it's $75 worth of photocopies to do your own will, because there's so many issues you just don't know.
Well, you're saying really that some lawyers are doing this work and may not be qualified.
Not as sharp as they should be.
Well, do we learn this in law school? I don't remember taking courses other than general estates, trusts. I don't remember a lot of emphasis on this type of legal work. Where do you get that training?
Well, law school, unfortunately, and I guess I could be attacked for saying this, but law school is basically a hoop-jumping process. I don't think that I really learned how to practice law until I'd been in practice for 5 years.
But what drew you to this kind of work? You mentioned it's not lucrative.
Nope, it's not.
It's got to be very frustrating because you feel the law is not giving you the tools you need to do your job. How do you do it?
Well, there's a protective element in all of us. We want to help others. You know, it's kind of that, you know, pay it forward or pay back to all the good things that have happened. And being a successful lawyer for 38 years is almost a miracle nowadays. I feel blessed in that.
But it does sound to me...
You feel useful.
It does sound to me that if you happen to be a parent with adult children who don't get along and cannot agree on what's best for you, in the event that you can't agree, or that you're not capable of making that decision, you could be in trouble.
Absolutely, because it becomes a battle between lawyers, too. And, of course, many lawyers charge a lot of money for their services.
Well, then the obvious question to me is, if this is often about money, and you said at the outset that a lot of this is driven by money, greed, what should the senior do with their money beforehand to make sure that there will be no battle? Because I'm thinking proactively here. If I know my children are going to fight about my money, I better deal with that money now. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
It does, and if it could happen, but in many cases, the senior involved isn't thinking ahead, that far ahead. They're trusting all of their children. They're loving all their children.
Are they in a form of denial?
Yes.
That they think their children really do get along?
They don't want their children fighting, so they want to sort of remain outside of taking one part or another. However, there comes a point where, in fact, somebody does have to take responsibility.
So what do you want to say to people watching who might be in that situation where they know deep down that their children are perhaps irretrievably unable to rebuild the bridge? What do you say to them? What do they need to do?
Well, there's one practical step that I do recommend. A power of attorney is probably your most effective tool to deal with the finances. And I recommend that if you have one favored child that you fairly trust, it sounds...
well, now that sounds like a remedy to make sure the war gets even more escalated, because now you've picked your favorite child.
Now, what you do, though, is you tag the power of attorney with a professional like a lawyer. And therefore, you now have a lawyer involved who requires both signatures on that power of attorney. And if the lawyer messes up, he's insured.
I was wondering if that was the solution. I think it must be very painful to be in a situation where you don't get along with your siblings for whatever reason, and then to find out that the sibling you don't get along with got the power of attorney and not you. Now that could create more resentment, more bitterness long after that parent is gone. Maybe the answer is get a lawyer. get a lawyer to be the power of attorney and not have one of your children at all. I mean, I don't know, and I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just wondering if that's an option.
It probably could be a very good option, particularly if there has been disharmony between siblings.
Of course, you would need to pick a lawyer that's going to outlive you.
Well, not only that, but you've also got to pick a lawyer that you have absolute trust in, too.
Is that a concern?
Partially, but remember, we have compulsory insurance, so if the lawyer does mess up, the estate is covered usually.
Do you have power of attorney for clients?
I do.
And is that because they don't have a family member that they trust?
Quite often, they would rather have me than have a debate.
Really? Is it expensive to have a lawyer do it?
No.
What does it cost generally to have a lawyer manage your affairs if you're not able to make decisions for yourself?
Well, that would be depending, like how long is a piece of string, I can't really say, but initially the cost itself to repair it is not very much, and that may sit in your fireproof vault for 10 or 15 or 20 years. But once you kick in, then you're going to charge fees probably on your regular hourly rate. And that could be expensive. So what we do recommend is that the lawyer can hire people who are less expensive to do some of the duties.
I guess this really comes down to something that Ron Winter said to me during the break. We need to decide what kind of society we want to live in and what degree of respect and dignity we are going to accord our seniors. And in a population that's aging, the demographic...
More and more seniors all the time.
This is becoming a very, very important issue, not just publicly, but for us as individuals.
I think seniors organizations, throughout should be counseling seniors to get a will, to make sure that they have taken care of power of attorney. And I definitely believe in moving to get some kind of representation agreement too.
And you need more volunteers.
We certainly do need more volunteers. And
where can people go to find out how to become involved? Is there a website?
In Victoria, it's the Seniors Entitlement Service.
What about all over North America? Is there an international organization?
I'm sure there are advocacy groups all over North America.
So people should check on the net.
Absolutely.
And find an organization if they want to get more involved in this.
Or get trained as an advocate or whatever.
Well, one of the things that Ron Winter said in his book, and I quote, "The key to planning for your senior years is awareness." Today, this episode of Family Matters, one of the most important episodes I think we will ever do, was aimed at encouraging all of you, everyone, to become aware of the realities of your own life, the dynamic of the people around you, and know how to make sure that your legal rights are protected so that you never become a victim of elder abuse. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to our guests for taking the time to enlighten us. This has been extremely informative. From everyone here at Family Matters, thank you for joining us. See you next time.